One Question is designed to give subscribers valuable insights on how executive leaders in college athletics think about key issues on their respective campuses, in their departments, or within their leagues and conferences.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown and welcome to One Question, where we highlight executive leaders in college athletics. Our guest today is Shawn Respert. Shawn is currently an assistant coach with the Chicago Bulls. Greetings, Shawn. Thanks for joining us today.
Good morning. I appreciate you taking some time out to be able to talk about, I think, some critical fields in basketball now.
Now, Shawn, you spent time in the NBA and some time playing overseas. You spent some time in college as a coach. Various positions in the NBA come into what you're doing now, helping to coach with the Chicago Bulls. And my opinion, and from my perspective, especially knowing you as a part of the family and what you've done and how you interact with basketball players, I'd say that you have a ton of insight on what would coaches in the NBA, coaches in college, even high school coaches, and just a general perspective of basketball players coming out of high school or coming out of college or coming into the NBA and professional leagues. What are some of the concerns that the basketball community has with regard to the current basketball players?
Well, one of the things that I could tell you, even here with the Chicago Bulls, the game is changing faster. There's always cycles that every sport goes through where you see the athlete becomes a different entity. Whether you're dealing with the size of an athlete, the age of an athlete, the endurance or length of a career of an athlete, like all of that affects coaching and how you are teaching the game. I think the thing that we see now, the biggest impact is, with social media and the awareness of I think the player has a better, probably even a quicker awareness of who he is or who he's perceived to be in the sport. It creates a quicker inflated ego about who his role. And I think the one thing that we try to do from our perspective in the game right now is try to hammer home the idea of being like a role player. I think when players stayed in high school for 4 years at the same school, when players were in college for 3 or 4 years, you had a chance to see yourself grow within a role and maybe even grow outside a role, become a bigger figure inside the whatever system that you're playing in. But now I think we have to do a better job understanding that the kids' perception of themselves is growing faster than you can get the role to grow. And so when they start to growing outside of the role that you have for them in their own minds, you're fighting kind of this time capsule that seems to put your team. It's not even the player at concern. You're putting the team in concern because the player he thinks he's ready for a bigger role, and maybe he is, but the team hasn't grown enough for that role to grow with the team. So I think I would just always, like for us, we try to glorify the true role player, the guy who just does the little things, the guy who is a guy that's more of a specialist than a guy who assumes to be a star. I think one of the biggest things that I've tried to take guys who come into our system, and what I've done for years now, is I've tried to tell a guy I think social media allows student athletes and young players to be a celebrity before they're a star. Because when you're a star, you are a celebrity. And being a star, the only way to become a star is you have to, within your peers will validate you as a star, because those are the people that are playing against you or working with you or, competing against you. And those are the people who deem you as like a star player. But when the validation comes from the outside of the field that you're working in, as a basketball player, if it's the fans that's telling you you're a star, it's a little bit different than your teammates telling you and your coaches telling you or your opponents telling you that you're a star. When they tell you you're a star, you're an absolute star. So I think that's what I try to look at the role player is, like, let's glorify him a little bit more, because the work that he has to do with staying within his role of the team, and maybe what is perceived as a diminished role is going to be like the biggest factor and seeing whether guys make a successful transition from growing from a small seed into a bigger plant.
Right. Now, you've been engaged with the game for more than 20 years. I mean, obviously coming out of Michigan State in 95, playing in the NBA, and then getting into coaching and administration for the last 15 to 16 years. You've seen this whole thing as an evolution. And obviously, well, I think it's obvious. To me, it looks this way. There's no turning back, right? Social media is not going anywhere. These guys are transferring. I mean, everything, the dynamic is just different, but you've seen the evolution. So do you see effective methods that people are using to adjust?
Well, I look at the building blocks of, what we all are trying to do in sports. I mean, we all want 3 or 4 pieces that are foundational pieces. And I think you have to be content with what your role is and play the role out. I think it takes more discipline for athletes to understand that they could always do more, but they put value and put a lot of pride in, doing some things that whatever this limited role is, just put pride in that. I think that helps a great deal with taking this big project, having all of these players that come from so many different backgrounds and so many different coaching philosophies, and to have to hit restart, when you come into a new system. Now, if you need to play a bigger role, you're capable, but you're going to stay within your frame, within your area until called upon. I think that's the hardest part about, I think in our world as a pro athlete, is getting these guys to concede. And a scenario I always say, if you put 3 20-point scorers on the same team, do you think that you can average 60 points a game minimum because you got 3 different 20-point scores? And it's not true, because somebody has to take a different role. You can't, there isn't that many shots to be had. So how do you convince a guy, to do something else that is probably just as important as scoring 20 points a game? I think one of the things I'll always, go down to saying is, when you're done playing your career and you call up your teammates and they do a survey about, whether you were a good teammate or not, or whether they enjoyed playing with you and having an opportunity to experience the game with you, would majority of those players have enjoyed that experience? If the answer is no, you didn't do your job. You wasted a lot of time playing the sport, but your teammates should have enjoyed having an opportunity to play with you during the time that you played the sport.
Right. What you're talking about, part of what you're talking about sounds like, for a technical term, almost roster management, right? I mean, you want to make sure you're bringing quality people into the organization, and that goes for college and when you talk about in the pros. Your experience, have you seen people who do that well? What is your experience with that over the last 15 to 16 years?
I think the biggest thing for me is, as a coach, and especially after having the chance to work in college the years that I worked, you have to believe in your own system and your own philosophy. It's easy for the outside to tell you, and sell you about certain student athletes and certain players that, are perfect for you. But you have to keep in mind, like every parent and every coach that is, marketing their player, they're not looking at the whole. They're looking at the piece. And it certainly would be a great piece for their son or their player that they coach to be able to get into school and be able to get into the system that, that fits for somebody else. But the comparative analysis, you have to be very careful about, if a guy that averaged a certain number of points in the system, doesn't mean that when he leaves that the 20 points are there for the next guy. That, every player has its own unique thumbprint about what he can do in a system. Now, a great coach will morph the system just enough to take advantage of the player's, abilities, because one guy's ability is going to be different than another. But to me, the aspect that we have to do a better job of is just believing in our system, and that everybody won't agree, and it's okay. It's okay that everybody won't agree to it. But if you don't believe in your own philosophy and your own system, sometimes you're grabbing players that it's easy to look at scoring as like the new sexy, and it is. Steph Curry has really opened the game up to a new dimension of what being able to stretch the floor out and shoot all of these 3-point shots. But at the end of the day, If your system is built on getting the ball into the paint and getting to the rim, then you need to have your personnel match that. Don't try to mirror what everybody else is doing. You fit your philosophy with the personnel that you need, and you'll have as much success as anybody else.
I'd imagine if you were in a room talking to a bunch of parents who had kids who were dynamic basketball players, could go to college or do the 1 year thing or whatever it is they do, and they have professional qualities, professional tendencies to be great in the NBA and tendencies to be great in college. When you address them to change the mind of a bunch of parents who think their kid is the best thing in the world, think their kid is going to help them possibly make a bunch of money, or even if the goal is to be in college and get a degree, how would you address parents?
I would challenge parents to allow their kids to grow in their role. Like if they think of basketball as a gateway and a tool for life, you know, like I said, glorify the small role. The person that we come to work, and sometimes I get here earlier in the mornings, and there's a staff that comes in here and makes sure that the offices are cleaned, and they come in and pick up the trash, and they are wiping things down. Like that's just as important as when I'm on the sideline trying to get my players to run the right play. Like everybody has a role to play in order to make this whole thing work. And I can't look at the person that makes sure that my offices are in the way that I need it to be, so that I could do the best job that I could do and not worry about coming in here and cleaning up and doing all this other stuff. Like that is a small role. It's not even a role that I think is glorified, but we have to not forget that that person's job is just as important in the way that the Chicago Bulls organization is, the perception of whether we're a professional team or not, and whether we're trying to put our players in the best position to win. That little role is just as important as the CEO at the top. If somebody don't do their job, then it's going to come loose at some point. Somewhere it's going to come loose, and somebody's not going to enjoy that experience of being a part of the Chicago Bulls organization. I think that's what we have to do. Let's not forget that everybody has this role to play, and although it might not get the publicity or get the impact every day, being able to be seen by the general public, I think I would challenge parents to get their kids, the student athletes, to play these small roles, because that's what you're going to need when you transition out of basketball. When you go get a normal job in a career, you're going to start off at the lower end. You're not going to get off at the high end. You have to start at the lower end and work your way up. If you are humbled in that process and continue to work hard and not try to force things on people, you'll find yourself in really good situations in no time. So I don't want to feel like you can't, utilize technology and social media now, but you do need an ability just to grind down and put in some real time and see yourself like mature in your role, grow in time.
And understand that there's value in that process, right? The step-by-step
Absolutely.
maturation. I'll ask one more question here. One final question. During your time working in the league, right, as assistant coach, and you did some things in operation, done some things with player development, do you ever hear from or talk to college coaches about their guy? How's my guy doing up there in the league? Or, hey, tell me about managing this guy, and he played for you or something like that, or anything. Is there an interaction there with college coaches on specifically how guys are doing now that they're in the NBA?
I think the biggest thing I want to do is when I speak to their guys, I try to convey a message that, are these guys good locker room guys? Our turnover rate is so fast. We have so many younger players now in the NBA with one and dones and two and dones. I think it's the maturity factor. Like for me, the first jobs that a lot of us had growing up were, we had paper routes. We worked at fast food chains. We did kind of odd jobs. We cut grass in the summer. It was very, you had to have an ability, I think, to be a little more creative, getting out and actually be assertive to get out and earn some money. In the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I think now the way that we've transitioned into the basketball and sport world being such a sports specific thing, I think it kind of hurts. Like a lot of the kids, their first paycheck says the three letters. It's either NFL or NBA or whatever, MLB. This is their first job. And so they're making these mistakes that we all made back when we were, when we were late for our jobs or didn't do a good job, you know, we're cutting the grass or putting the paper out on time. We had to hear about it then, and there was a little bit of threat of understanding we could lose our job because of our professionalism or lack of being professional. I think then you start to grow and understand in that role going into your next job that you knew you couldn't show up late. You couldn't, call in and the day that you're supposed to be there and say you're not going to come, calling in sick like that. Those things didn't matter. When they put you on a schedule, you had to abide by the schedule. I think now these younger players and younger athletes they make some of these mistakes early on because they don't know, but it's the team that gets hurt in the end because they don't realize, are we capable of running a team when we have players that show up late for practices, for shoot-arounds, for games, for flights. Like these are things if you really loved and was waiting for an opportunity to finally make it to the big leagues and be a professional, these are things that should never go wrong, ever. You should be the first one at the gym. And everybody, there's no perfect basketball player, but the time of learning to be a professional, learning to understand where you fit in this sport. You may have been a superstar at every level that you played at, but when you get here, you may only be needed to be a role player, but winning is the secret ingredient. I would give me a winner before you give me a talented person any day, because a winner can understand he's probably already done multiple roles in order to create a winning atmosphere. I'll take that before I take a talented player at any time.
Right, and things you talk about, this is why the role you play right there at the Bulls and the roles of head coaches and assistant coaches and across the board in all sports are so important, especially if you're getting kids in that don't understand the dynamics of effort and discipline and those things. So the influence of a coach becomes of the most important. Shawn, this has been an excellent conversation. I really appreciate you joining me here on One Question.
Thank you.
That was Shawn Respert. Shawn is an assistant coach with the Chicago Bulls. And of course, this is Ty Brown with One Question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of One Question is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.